We'll do a lot of events because I think
it.
we can go. We can even do a. You want to do a whole day workshop? Is that too much? A half a day?
No, I could do.
like
Let's
an
talk
afternoon
about it.
thing?
Yeah, that'd be fun. I did that. I mean, I did a 10-hour at Islin. It works in chunks, though.
Yeah.
It's nice to have chunks because it's intense stuff.
Right.
You know, it's not like sort of fun chanting. You know, this is
40
hard stuff. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, I'd love to do it. I mean, I just can't get over how many people you just got in there with like nothing.
I know. That's
no time.
30
my email list.
seconds.
I've accumulated this.
Yeah.
And I'm creating a field in a sense.
Exactly. And this
Going to black,
And
20
only like
seconds.
good people.
Yeah.
People ask me all the time, "Oh, will you do this? Will you do this?" But it's like I like people like
15
wrestling.
seconds.
Yeah. Oh, well,
10
good.
seconds. Get ready. All quiet on the set. 5 seconds. Coming up in 2.
Welcome to New Realities. My name is Alan Steinfeld. And on this program, I like to investigate the nature of consciousness and who we are as not just physical beings, but beings that exist on many levels, many realms, many dimensions, let's say. And I think consciousness is a way of defining that. I mean, what consciousness means we'll look at today. And what reality is, that's something also we need to understand. So my guest is someone who's really devoted the last few years of her life investigating the nature of consciousness. What is reality? What is this thing of quantum physics? Who's the observer? And she's made the understanding of quantum physics palatable for the lay person. And she's written a great book, The Field. Was a book. It wasn't her first book. I think it was her 4th book, but it was a book that really had an impact on our culture and really opened up a new way of understanding the nature of the mind. And then her recent book is called The Intention and Experiment. This is Lynne McTaggert's book, and Lynne McTaggert is my guest today. Thank you, Lynne.
Thank you, Alan.
Yes, it's great having you in New York. And
it's so much fun to come home because I am a New Yorker.
Yeah. So you were a journalist that saw that there was some unanswered questions about science and particularly quantum physics. Richard Feynman says, if you think you understand quantum physics, you probably don't. Right? So it's like, it has to do with the power of the observer to affect the world and the experiment around it. But how would you quickly define quantum physics? I know people have written volumes on it, but...
Okay, well, quantum physics is the physics of potential. It's the physics of the very small. And the physicists have always made this bizarre connection between the physics of the very large, everyday sticks and stones world we know about. And they believe that quantum particles act one way, and they act very weirdly one way. And then once they start realizing they're part of a collective whole, like they're part of my leg, so they start behaving themselves and acting in a classical way.
Right.
So now we're realizing that that distinction is arbitrary, that actually big things aren't in this finalized state, because we all know that quantum particles are in a state of potential. They're not actually a set thing yet. They're kind of like unset jello. And now we're sort of realizing that big things are also unset jello. And influenceable. But
except that Newtonian physics, or the physics of big things, has a predictable outcome. You drop a piece of paper, it'll drop to the ground. I mean, there's predictable science. This is the old paradigm.
Sure.
And the old paradigm says that with big things in classical physics, outcomes can be not only predicted, but exacted,
True. However, what they're finding now, because what we needed was more sophisticated equipment. We were at the mercy, and I just do want to say that at certain levels of things, dropping a ball will fall down, and we can measure the drop, etc.
Every time.
Every time.
Or maybe 1 in 10 billion, it won't do that, though.
Sure.
But yes, go ahead.
But quantum physics looks at what is the real nature of the reality. What is it made up of? And how does that act? And what we're now getting with our more sophisticated equipment is the ability to measure what is going on. And we're finding out that things are weirder. at at the level of the building blocks of nature than we thought of. That things are in a much more malleable state. For instance,
yes, good.
What they've found in doing a study of these particular spin glasses, they call them, which are magnetic and kind of anarchic particles, or and atoms, is that these things actually self-align and ignore outside influences like magnetic fields. In other words, they've got their own they march to their own drummer, and that they've got what they call in quantum physics non-local effects. They have effects across distance without force, without classical force, a Newtonian force, which we usually think that one thing influences another thing only by a push, by dropping it, kicking it, freezing it, giving a good swift kick, something like that. And these things are connecting without that in the big visible world of matter. They're also finding that big things like molecules are in a state of superposition, which is that state of multiple states of becoming. You know, in the quantum world, things aren't one set thing. They're a potential, of all possible selves.
Right.
And now we're finding molecules, big molecules, in fact, are the same, are also in the state of becoming. Amazing implication. What it means is that this is not, a molecule isn't a set something yet, but a something that is ripe for influence.
Something that once we define it becomes locked in as a thing. Is that where consciousness comes in?
Yeah.
Once we look at it,
Yeah.
it becomes a particle. If we're not looking, it's a wave. This is from what the belief. Is that true then of bigger things? If I'm not...
It appears so. It appears so. I mean, and this is... It seems that, and this is the big conundrum, but there's a huge body of physicists who believe in this so-called observer effect and believe that reality is created and indeed influenced by the observer.
So if no one's looking at a piece of land, a forest, it doesn't exist? It exists as potential? I mean, is that what you're saying? I mean...
Well, no. I'm saying if no one ever looked at
if no one ever looked at something, it would not exist.
There are people who believe if no one had seen Hitler, he wouldn't have existed.
Well, it's too bad somebody saw him, right?
Exactly.
No, but can that really be true? Because maybe we're not looking at the thing, but its influence. Let's say, so there's galaxies out there that obviously exist even though we haven't seen them, but and they've had an effect on other particles that will then have an effect on us. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, the question is on who is us and who is consciousness doing the looking.
Well, let's answer those questions. I mean, who is consciousness?
And it doesn't have to be human consciousness. And it doesn't, I mean, there's a school of thought that also believes that other things seeing other things create that collapse, that wave. So, you know, this is all under discussion, and I don't pretend to be the final arbiter of those kinds of things. But I do say that they are certainly under discussion, and there are serious physicists asking these questions and convinced that when we go to sleep at night, the universe doesn't just sit there. It may disappear.
For us, because we are the center of consciousness. Each individual is the center of consciousness. And
it's under discussion, but there's certainly enough evidence to show that the observer effect is there, it's real, it has an effect. We are ordering systems and influencers.
What if the universe itself was one big observer, one big consciousness? I mean, that's a metaphysical sort of question, but what if this thing called consciousness that we both have is actually in the field itself? I mean,
I don't think it's if. I think it certainly is out there in the field because, and many scientists also believe that consciousness certainly doesn't exist. It's not locked up in the skull.
Right.
Because if it were, you wouldn't have all those instances of near-death experiences where you've got the computer unplugged during that time and the person still knows everything that went on in the room while he was so-called dead. They also have a sense of flying up to the ceiling and seeing all of this. Now, even the most conservative neurosurgeons cannot explain out-of-body experiences during near-death experiences. And that suggests that consciousness is not locked in here. Consciousness may not die. And so consciousness is more likely out there in the field.
So consciousness is possibly everything that's observable, even if, so everything that exists possibly because consciousness has created it into being.
Yes.
So
yes.
we're substituting God for consciousness in a sense then.
Sure.
I mean,
well, get away from the idea that there's an us and the him.
Right.
You know,
right.
and that's the big problem that we all have is and the native traditions understood this much better than we did. We think of a man with a long beard sitting on a cloud upstairs.
Right.
They said, no, we are God, we are consciousness, we are all one. And getting your mind around we are all one is a big thing to get your mind around because it means there's nothing separate, including God.
Right. So you're building, I mean, because of this, I think, and the work you're doing is that there's a new paradigm of, let's say, this God or spirit that mixes science, truly noetic science.
Yes.
Is coming in. So if we are God, let's say, in this traditional way, then this is where intention comes in. Yes. This is Lynne's book, The Intention Experiment, because if we are that, if we are so connected to that realm of consciousness, then with that connection, we can influence things intentionally.
Yes, and that's really the question I wanted to ask with this book. It was the question that was left over from this book, which was, how far can we go? Right. You know, can I stand up and stop the Metroliner 945 with my thoughts, you know, Superman style? Can I have my children do better at math if I think about it? You know, how far, what can I do with this?
So what needs to happen you talk about powering up where our intentions come online, you know, there's how do you amplify the effect of our intention? Can you just go through that?
Sure. I mean, now again, let me just emphasize that I am not a self-help guru here, and that I've developed this program by extrapolating from what has worked in laboratories with intention. Yes. And there have been hundreds and hundreds of studies of consciousness and its effect on matter. So this is what I've been able to glean, and also from many interviews and study of intention masters, like Qigong masters and healers and things like that. But first you need to power up, and by that, create a sense of peak intensity. And by doing, I think the easiest way to do that is some sort of stilling the mind through meditation. And you can do any one of a number of things. You can use a mantra, you can use a tone, you can use the breathing, concentration on the breathing, you can use a didgeridoo, whatever it is that gets you there. I also suggest things like mindfulness meditation, which is non-judgmental awareness of the present moment. Focus, intense practice and focus on what things smell like right now, how things feel. You know, when you're eating your cornflakes,
be present.
What does it feel? Be present.
Yes.
What does the cornflakes feel like when they're going down your throat?
Yes.
What does it smell like? What does the day smell like? That kind of attention all the time develops that muscle, that peak intensity, that intention. I also think believing it is really important, and which is why I've written a book about the subject with lots and lots and lots of references, so that people, we in the Western minds with our skepticism, have some sort of proof that this is true. It's important to have some sort of compassion, it seems. People who have concentrated on the heart, like the heart math people suggest, sending a compassionate intention seems to be an important thing. Times and places seem to be important.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I started looking at a lot of studies showing that geomagnetic effects are important. Now, this is what goes on from the sun. The sun is a very vengeful star, and and sends us lots of things that are extraordinarily powerful gases. If we had space weather on our planet, it would blow up the Earth in an instant. It's that ferocious. But all these solar flares and things that go on all the time from the sun and coronal mass ejections cause tremendous influence on the geomagnetic shield that surrounds the Earth. And this also seems to have an enormous effect on human beings and all living things. We know that, for instance, homing pigeons lose their way home when there's a geomagnetic storm. They can't read read. They suddenly their frequencies get scrambled.
So for humans, does it help the geomagnetic? Let's say there's more solar flares. Does that help our power of intention?
Yes,
it does.
Yes, a noisy sun seems to help all kinds of mind over matter experiments.
For humans, but not for pigeons.
For humans, well, pigeons, maybe if they were trying to intend something. But in this case, they're just trying to read the geomagnetically getting their way home.
I see. So,
but a noisy sun seems to affect us. I mean, we know that the geomagnetic effects have profound effects on the heart and the brain primarily. And so it seems to affect our ability to do intention.
Interesting.
I mean, and it even messes up, big geomagnetic effects and changes mess up remote viewers. Ingo Swann, in a laboratory, was able to influence and lower his powers of sight for remote viewing by changing the geomagnetic pulses around him.
Oh, he changed the geomagnetic pulses. Well, and so you said places also, are there power spots that help influence?
Well, any place can become a power spot. That's the interesting thing. According to laboratory evidence, when they've done certain mind over matter experiments and certain healing effects in certain places, and they've done it in the same place, it starts working faster and better over time. So that would suggest that there's kind of this knot of energy that accumulates when you do intention at the same place, the same time. So I recommend that people create a little intention space.
But the power of old healing temples was that same idea.
Sacred space,
Sacred space. And what about the configurations of space, like in a feng shui model where there's certain colors and things? Do you find that helps, colors and shapes?
I haven't found evidence about it, but why not? Why not try it? Why not try it? Certainly these were disciplines done for thousands of years, and there probably is something to them.
The other fascinating thing, there's so many fascinating things about your work, but this whole idea of retro intention, how the future can affect the past.
This is the one, my husband cannot get his brain around this one.
Yeah, because I really want to understand this too. I really, really do. So.
Okay, well, there was a really interesting study by an Israeli physician who wanted to prove alternative medicine didn't work. So he wanted to think of a really preposterous study. So he got a bunch of patients in the hospital who had suffered from sepsis, which is blood infection, life-threatening, divided them into two groups and sent prayer to one of the groups.
Right.
And he found in every way the groups that had the prayer were healed quickly, got better faster, etc. And there was only one hitch to the experiment, which was the people were in hospital in the early 90s, and the praying was done in the year 2000.
Really?
So this was really, and this was published in the Lancet and had a huge amount of response because it seemed to suggest we can change the past.
But wasn't that study from the 90s sort of in consciousness already in the field, let's say?
Well, no, what happened, and there's been many other studies like this, where they've deliberately done even REG experiments with these random event generators, these random devices, where they've sent intentions to change them back in time. What the belief is of these scientists is that we're not actually changing the past, we're changing what would have happened in the first place. In other words, our consciousness is going back down the timeline to affect what had happened to begin with. And what they reckon that's all about is the fact that the future is constantly affecting the present. Our future selves are constantly having an effect on the present.
So how far into the future do we have to go to have that, to know,
well, the bizarre thing is to get beyond the idea that time proceeds as a straight little arrow.
And how does it proceed then?
I think it's closer to the idea that there's one great big ever-present now going on. And that there is an effect, and that's certainly the view of many of the physicists and the scientists I spoke to.
But there's also the many worlds view where, you may create a different universe if you would go infect the past, but there's another universe that's happening with a different effect that wasn't affected by the future. You know those theories, right?
Sure, and could be the case. Could be the case.
But they actually, in these studies that you report, there are people who set an intention in the present and have found out that they have changed the past or affected the past.
Loads of studies, and
Yes.
even some very. There's been a scientist who did studies seeing if people could retroactively affect people walking through a department store and make them walk more in one direction than another. Retroactive attempts to change the traffic in Vienna, that's worked. A Dutch physicist named Dick Bierman did a whole analysis of all these kinds of studies, and he said there's no question that there are huge effect sizes here, that there is huge significance, and that the most likely description of this, the most likely explanation, is that the present is contingent upon future conditions.
The present is contingent on future. Well, what is the future then except another present then, right? I mean...
Yeah, the present is... The future is the present and the future are both things that are potential and get actualized. And there is a link going on all the time, so that our future selves somehow influence our present selves. Now, I don't pretend to understand exactly why. There have been many, many theories as to how. But, I mean, we can say one thing, which is a quantum wave has the same information going forward as going backward. It doesn't matter. Direction doesn't matter.
Right. So it seems like these are spiritual questions scientists and physicists are dealing with. What is consciousness? What is this thing that exists outside of time as an observer?
Yeah, and the big converses have been devoted to this. There was a big conference on retro intention, or retroactive effects, basically. And there were some very conservative physicists sitting there and agreeing that the evidence they have suggests the paradigm is busted, you know, that we as burst, and we have to develop something new to embrace this.
Well, that's what it seems like. We don't have the new laws of physics in place. I mean, the old paradigm doesn't work, obviously.
Yeah.
It doesn't have all the answers, but it seems like we are like groping in the dark for these new equations that aren't quite in place. They haven't quite... We need a new Einstein, a new Newton to understand these new laws.
Exactly, exactly. And we need to ask the outrageous questions.
Yes.
I mean, that's what I'm trying to do with the intention experiment, is to create experiments, big group experiments, where we all send intentions at the same time to a lot of measurable targets. And I've got labs all around the world working with me. And we're going to get more and more outrageous, Ellen.
Just give your website so people can tune in. And
sure.
Then,
it's www.theintentionexperiment.com.
Why we just, I want to just get back to the retro intention, because I asked Dean Radin, who's an amazing noetic scientist working in the similar field, I asked him, if there is this thing, retro intention, how do you explain the double slit experiment where when you're not looking, it's a wave, the light particles are a wave, and then when you are looking, it's a particle. Because you have to then have looked at the results of the not looking, and it's still a wave, even though if we have retro intention, it all would have been a particle. You know what I'm asking?
Yeah, but you didn't look earlier. You didn't look
earlier, but eventually you looked. So isn't that a retro intention? Because you've looked at the results of the experiment, and it was a wave. But
why didn't it affect it earlier?
Yes.
Why did it? Because you didn't send it back to affect something earlier. I suppose it's the direction of your intention.
Explain that about the direction of intention.
Well, in other words, you sent your intention to affect it at this particular point in its journey.
At the result of the light going through the thing.
Yeah, you didn't send it earlier on.
Oh, so I looked at the effect. So so when I looked at the effect of it, the light was a particle.
Yeah.
Or a wave.
Yeah.
But if I would have looked while it was going through the slit, it would have become have become
at any
a
point where you look and measure, it collapses down to a single point.
A single point. But if I don't look,
it stays as a wave.
but I will eventually have to look in order to see the result of it being a wave.
Yeah, yeah.
But somehow retro intention...
Because you didn't send it back to the beginning.
I know,
You
I'm just
it's,
trying
it's
to
the direction of your intention. It's the direction of your intention. You have sent it to a certain place. If you had sent an intention to it earlier,
Yes.
you know, in its journey, you would have affected it at that point.
Okay. Okay.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I hope I didn't lose the audience on that with the double sync. But does that question make sense?
Because you have to ask, as I say, you have to ask these outrageous questions because, you know, that is science. Science is always, we've always asked outrageous questions and been belittled for it. Scientists are constantly asking things like, you know, why do stones fall from the sky?
Right.
And most people say they don't, stupid.
Well, that was in the 1800s until they found out there were stones falling from the sky. So what's the most outrageous question you can ask with all the research you've done?
Can our thoughts change the world?
But
can
you
our
already,
thoughts...
But you already know the answer to that.
No. Can our collective thoughts change something? Can we get together, all together as one voice and stop pollution, stop global warming, stop starvation? Can a thought do that much? And that's really what I want to ask with these big experiments.
Well, you see it on small levels with the understanding of coherence. When things are coherent, when thoughts are coherent, they have a more powerful effect.
Yes.
So if we as a collective humanity are one, as singularity, we will have a more powerful effect.
That's the question. That's the outrageous question I want to ask.
But you know the answer. I mean, it seems like you know the answer, right?
Well, I don't know necessarily whether, if all of us are trained on a target, for instance, we want to create a little mini Gaia that is, and we are going to artificially raise the temperature. And that will be our first experiment. And then I'll ask my readers at a certain point to get on our website at a certain time and day and send their intention to lower that temperature. I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know if we can do things on that kind of gross level, and whether lots of people thinking the same thought at the same time have a bigger effect. So that's the outrageous question.
That's a good outrageous question. Is there one more outrageous question that you could conceive that will even propel us further? Is there something that you're just thinking about for, let's ask the future?
Well, can we start using thoughts to change our societies and change our world? We've made such a mess of things. We've made such a hash of things. Can we really create a better world with our thoughts?
And new realities, right?
And new realities.
Unknown dreams. Thank you, Lynn. Thanks.
Thanks so much.
It's been great having you in New York. I've hosted Lynn here in New York for a talk, and we'll bring her back to New York. And definitely pick up this book, The Intention Experiment, because it's a beautiful book and it's practical. That's what's good. It's this book, The Field, was more theoretical.
Yes.
And this book, The Intention Experiment, and go to the website, which was
www.theintentionexperiment.com.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alan.
Okay. I'm Alan Steinfeld for New Realities, and if you have any questions, just email me at newrealities@earthlink.net or check the website newrealities.tv, and I welcome your response. So thank you for watching. Thanks.
Asking all the big questions, huh?
Right. Right. No, I mean, there's so much to cover.
There's so much to cover, but yeah.
When I asked Dean Radin that question,